oops. So, let's look at a verse of Scripture, Psalm 33:10. We referred to this last week, but actually it was I'm in my morning devotions, I'm concentrating on the book of Psalms for a period of time, and I'm using Spurgeon's Treasury of David. And I would highly recommend that to anybody. There's a lot of reading there. Some of the Psalms some of the shorter Psalms have 8 or 10 pages worth of commentary on them. How many have read some of Treasury of David? Okay, well, that's kind of amazing. I'd never read it before. I've read chunks of it, but I never read through it. Spurgeon wrote a thing called Treasures of David, which is a commentary on all the Psalms, and he does a commentary on the verses as he goes through. Plus, he has a whole section in there on hints to preachers. On verse 1, you should think about this, and on verse 2, you should think about this, and verse 5 through 8, you should think about this, and so on. And then he has a whole section of comments that other preachers have made on this particular passage, and some of them go on for pages and pages and pages. So there's a lot of reading there, and it's very interesting and very profitable. So that's what I've been concentrating on, and I referred to Psalm 33 last week, not in relation to my reading, but in relation to our class. And Psalm 33, and just happens that this week I'm doing Psalm 33, so coincidentally. It says, "He make the devices of the people of none effect." And Spurgeon said about that, "The cause of God is never in danger." Sometimes we get all steamed up, and we've probably all got steamed up about something that's happening in the world or some situation, somewhere, sometime. I don't suspect there's anybody here that hasn't got upset about something. But he says, the cause of God is never in danger. Infernal craft is outwitted by infinite wisdom, and satanic malice held in check by boundless power. I think that's a good preface to our study on environmentalism or climate change or global warming or whatever it is we want to call it. So we started this study last week, and we had a memory verse, or 2 memory verses. So let's read these together. Anybody work on memorizing? No, you don't have to put up your hand. I don't want to embarrass the rest of you if somebody did it and the rest didn't. But memory verses. Let's read these together. Let's do it twice, and that'll help us learn them. You may not get it totally memorized, but it'll at least be in your mind. For by him, and this is talking about the Lord Jesus Christ, for by him were all things created that are in heaven and that are in earth, visible and invisible, whether they be thrones or dominions or principalities or powers. All things were created by him and for him, and he is before all things, and by him all things consist. There's a lot of prepositions in there. They were created by him, they were created for him. He is before all things, and by him all things consist. Wow. And that comes from where? Colossians chapter 1, verses 16 and 17. Okay. So you might want to work on that. Next time you turn the news on and somebody is getting all upset that the world's going to come to an end because of ozone depletion or because of carbon dioxide or excess carbon or who knows what, whatever the flavor of the week is. And we looked at last week, and I'm not going to review this, but we looked last week at a retrospective poem where this would be my great-great-uncle in 1934. He speculated on maybe we have reached the plateau of civilization, or maybe in another 60 years we'll look back and say things were going slow. Well, that was right. In another 60 years, things were going slow. So we'll just skip through that. And so our study actually starts with the global warming issue, and are there some concerns that people have? Some valid and some not valid. What's one of their big concerns? It's sea rise. And I'm just going to really quickly review this from last week. We didn't get online last week. We are online today, are we, guys? We didn't get online last week. I didn't greet our online people, so greetings, those of you that are watching online. And we saw that sea rise was one of the concerns, and if it were to rise as much as some of the people say, it is definitely a concern, and it may rise some, and it may be a concern. Some of that is due to stupidity of humankind. Why would we build a house 6 inches above the water level on a coastline? Like, why would we do that? Even under normal circumstances, never mind environmental change or anything else. Every once in a while we get a bunch of water coming in. You know, why do people build in some of the places they build? Now, historically they did it, but why do we still allow that to happen? It's kind of dumb, isn't it? Have you ever wondered why they do that? Well, crop production. You know, there's a big thing about crop production. It's going to get so warm, nothing will grow. And we'll have CO2. It's going to make things grow so fast that they won't have any food value. They become just like hay rather than good food and so on. This is the counter argument to the fact that CO2 is going to cause more crops to grow more abundantly. They say, well, they grow too fast and they're no good. It's rather interesting in greenhouses. What do they introduce into greenhouses on purpose? CO2. Okay? And I'm not going to try to debunk all this. I'm just going to make a few comments on it. Excesses of industrialization. And we talked about last week, there have been some excesses of industrialization. And I'll say this again. I am not opposed to looking after the earth. We should look after the earth. God gave, and we looked at this, and we'll look at it again quickly. God told Adam. Adam didn't suggest to God that he look after the earth. God told Adam to look after it. And he didn't tell him to destroy it, but he did tell him to use it. And later on, he told Noah to look after the earth, and he told him that all animals were fit for food. It seems that up to that time they hadn't eaten animals. Maybe they were all vegetarians before that. But all animals were good for food. So these people are going around saying, oh, we shouldn't eat animals, because they're our third cousins or whatever. Well, it might be their third cousins, but like the guy says, if monkeys sitting in the bam jam tree, and the monkeys concluded, man may have descended the ornery, you've heard that poem, man may have descended the ornery cuss, but brothers, he never descended from us. Well, even the monkeys don't want to own us. But there are some excesses of industrialization. Should we try to mitigate those? Have we had some excesses from industrialization in our province just recently? Was there something in the news just recently where some people were doing some things that probably they shouldn't be doing and the government hadn't shut them down? Did we have a big fire in St. John a couple of weeks ago caused by probably stuff in the wrong place at the wrong time and people not taking care of it and causing a lot of pollution? Well, that shouldn't be happening, and we should do something about that. Doesn't mean they're not supposed to process that stuff, but we should be more careful. So there are excesses, and we should look after them. What about pollution? Is pollution a bad thing? Yeah, it's a bad thing. Sure, it's a bad thing. Should we try to minimize it? Yes, we should. There's nothing wrong with that. But we don't need to get all, shall we say, religious about it. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. Environmentalism is actually a religion. It's a set of beliefs. And the main thing behind environmentalism is that I am in control. I'm talking about I as the human. I am in control, there is no God, and we are in control, and we have to fix things up. That's the philosophy behind it all. But that doesn't mean that there aren't concerns, and it doesn't mean we shouldn't be concerned about some things. I mentioned last week that I'm in the business where we try to save people energy. Is that a good thing? Anybody want to save money on their power bill? Sure. Why would we use more power than we should? Are there ways we can, minimize that? Sure there are. We should be doing that. Okay, what are the facts? Well, global warming. There was a little ice age. And we're not talking evolutionary stuff here. There was a little ice age that happened somewhere between 14th century and the 19th century. Debate as to when it started and when it ended, but mountain glaciers were expanded, mean temperatures dropped, and it was called a little ice age, and I'm not going to spend any more time on that. But there was also a medieval warming period before that. There's debates as to what would have caused that, but there was a period of time when the earth warmed up before there was a time when the earth cooled down. And what's the point? The point is climate changes. Anybody here live in New Brunswick? Does our climate change from time to time? Well, the facts. In 2006, Al Gore came out with a video called An Inconvenient Truth, and he's come out with another one since, Inconvenient Truth 2 or something like that. I did attend an early showing of this down in Sackville, and people were all, oh, it's just terrible, it's awful, and some of the things that were told in there were awful, except the only problem is some of them weren't true. But, as I said last week, if you have someone that starts with the premise of 450 million years ago, such and such a thing happened, just turn it off. Because they may be telling you some things that are true, but their whole premise is wrong. So, Al Gore became sort of the god of environmentalism, and he had a great influence on the politicians, and that sort of became the Bible for climate change movement. Carbon dioxide, is it a bad thing? Well, it's a bad thing if you get in a room full of carbon dioxide and there's no oxygen, you're going to suffocate, right? That is a bad thing. But we breathe oxygen. We give off, every time you breathe out, you give off carbon dioxide. But what do plants live on? Well, they live on fertilizer and water. They have to have fertilizer and they have to have water, but they have to have carbon dioxide as well. Plants do give off some carbon dioxide. I was doing a little research on this, on how much they give off, and one scientist said, well, to the readers, how many of you have ever shared a bedroom with a sibling? And what do your siblings give off? They give off carbon dioxide, right? Every time they breathe out, you give off carbon dioxide, so you're putting carbon dioxide in the room. Plants give off a very tiny fraction of that. At night, they start giving off, some of them give off carbon dioxide during the day. I'm not going to get into all the science of it. I'm not a botanist and all that stuff, a biologist. But they do give off a little bit during the daytime when they're processing. They almost exclusively use oxygen and almost don't give off carbon dioxide, but when the sun goes down, when the light goes down, they stop photosynthesizing and then they give off some carbon dioxide, but it's a very small amount. And it's a lot smaller than they thought. They've done some studies on trees and studied what's happening there, and the amount of carbon dioxide they give off is a lot smaller than what they thought. And they said one study that they worked with some trees somewhere. They took a whole bunch of trees and they put these infrared heaters out and in the ground and so on, and kept it warm all the time, and saw what happened to the trees. And I don't know how many years it was. It would be several hundred, if not several thousand years before the trees carbon dioxide would have any effect on the environment. So anyway, they do give it off, but it's not. We know that there's been many times in history that there were concentrations of carbon dioxide that's higher than it is now. They can tell that from tree rings and ice cores and so on. And it wasn't 50 billion years ago or whatever that it happened. So we looked at that God is the creator. I'm not going to redo these verses, but in the beginning God created the heaven and the earth. Man didn't create it. Monkeys didn't create it. It didn't come from nowhere. And I don't know if it was a video I was watching or an article I was reading, but this person made a statement that evolution decided. I mean, they actually came right and said that. Evolution decided. I thought, okay, what kind of an idiot is this? You know, evolution doesn't, first of all, there isn't any evolution, but even if there were, it doesn't decide anything. Even if evolution were true, it doesn't decide anything. It's a random process. But this person said evolution decided. And another one said something about I can't remember whether it was a plant or an animal. I think it was some kind of a strange animal that they decided that this was the better way to be than that way. And that's how come they are able to do this. So they decided in their evolutionary process that it was better to go this way than it was to go that way. Well, so I guess if we all decide we should have wings, in 40 billion years from now, we'll all have wings, right? Well, anyway. Not only is God the creator, but God's the owner. And the God is the delegator. As I mentioned earlier, he was the one that told Adam to look after things. It wasn't Adam's idea, it was God's idea to tell Adam to look after things. God is the sustainer. We just looked at verses, said he upholds all things. So what does Christ play in relation? What role does he play? Well, without the Lord Jesus Christ, everything falls to pieces. And why is the world anxious to take on this role? Because there is no God. We are God. And we'll have to take this over. Okay, now we're into new stuff. Global flood and the climate fluctuation. The fall. What did God say? Let's go back into Genesis chapter 1. What does verse 1 say? Let's say it together. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. Okay. Do we believe this Bible? If Genesis 1 is not true, then what should we do with the rest of the book? Throw it away. It may have some good ideas in it, but if the first verse is not true, then probably. I remember a number of years ago when I was at the community college, we had a textbook come in. It was a very well done textbook on electronics. It was really modern, very well done, with lots of color pictures and lots of diagrams and lots of explanations and so on. But in the chapter on solid-state electronics, it had a statement that was absolutely untrue. How it got in there, I don't know. So what does that make you think about the rest of the book? You're going to wonder how many other things are in there that aren't quite right. How that got in there, I don't know. One of our guys that was an expert in solid-state electronics and so on, anyway, he got a little upset. He was really upset. And we were using this textbook. I mean, when you pick a new textbook, you don't sit down and read every word and every paragraph and everything. And when we came to that chapter, it wasn't just a mistake. It wasn't a typo. It was actually a statement that was wrong. I can't even remember what it was now, but it was really bad. somebody that did the editing on that book and the critique on the book obviously missed things. But I use that as an illustration. We abandoned that textbook. We didn't use that again. We had to use it for that year because the students had all bought it and so on. But we didn't use it again because it just wasn't reliable. That might have been the only wrong thing in the whole book, but how do we know? You can't depend on it. So if in the beginning God created the heaven and earth is not true, then we don't know when he says, for God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believeth in him should not perish but have everlasting life. Maybe that's not true either. Right? It's either all true. How much Scripture is given by inspiration of God? All Scripture is given by inspiration of God. We believe in the verbal, plenary inspiration of this book. And what did God say in Genesis 1:31? Let's go there. Let's look at it. Sometimes we know these verses, but it's good to look at them. And God saw everything that he had made, and behold, it was what? Very good. It was very good. If God said it was very good, how good was it? It was perfect. It was perfect. And the evening morning were the sixth day. So, it was very good. Were there any environmental problems at that time? No. How come we have some today? Well, let's look at Genesis chapter 3. What happened in Genesis chapter 3? We won't read the whole chapter. We won't go over it all. But Adam and Eve sinned. And New Testament tells us, Romans chapter 5 says, as by one man sin entered into the world, and death by sin, and so death came upon all men because what? All have sinned. How many? All of us. All have sinned. So Adam and Eve sinned. And so sin and death entered. Oh, this thing here. I have this here for a purpose, but I didn't turn the sound off. I should have. There. Adam and Eve sinned and death entered. In verse 17, says, unto Adam, God said, because thou hast hearkened unto the voice of thy wife, and hast eaten of the tree of which I commanded thee, saying, thou shalt not eat of it, cursed is the ground for thy sake, in sorrow shalt thou eat of it all the days of thy life. Thorns also and thistles shall it bring forth unto thee, and thou shalt eat the herb of the field. In the sweat of thy face shalt thou eat bread, till thou return unto the ground, for out of it wast thou taken, for dust thou art, and unto dust thou shalt return. Oh, there's a whole bunch of stuff in there. Before that time, there weren't any weeds. God had given Adam work to do. He told him to look after the thing, but there weren't any weeds. He didn't have to go pull weeds. I don't know exactly what he had to do, but he had to do something. But he didn't have to pull weeds, and he didn't have to sweat and toil and so on, but he did have to work. Work is a good thing. So let's look a little further in some other verses here. What did God say to Eve? Earlier. He said, I will greatly multiply thy sorrow and thy conception, and sorrow shalt thou bring forth children, and thy desire shall be to thy husband, and he shall rule over thee. And he put man out of the garden in verse 22, 24. Lord God said, behold, man is become one of us to know good and evil. And now, lest he put forth his hand, and take also of the tree of life, and eat, and live forever. Therefore the Lord God sent him forth from the garden of Eden to till the ground from whence he was taken. He drove out the man, and he placed at the east of the garden of Eden cherubim and a flaming sword which turned every way to keep the way of the tree of life. So God cursed the earth. The earth is a cursed place. Who was it cursed by? It was cursed by God. If something is cursed, what does that mean about it? It's going to have problems, right? Ever since that time, the earth has had problems. And how long is that going to continue? Let's go to Romans chapter 8. Because the creature itself shall be delivered from the bondage of corruption into the glorious liberty of the children of God, for we know that the whole creation groaneth and travaileth in pain together until now. Okay, what's it say? It says the earth's a mess. The earth's in trouble. Even the creation groans and pains. What do animals do to one another? Well, they eat each other, right? Are they necessarily very kind when they kill another animal? No, they just kill it and eat it, and sometimes it's not even dead when they start eating, right? Even your favorite chickens, what do chickens do? Chickens are very what? They're very cannibalistic. Chickens like to eat other chickens. Ever see a chicken get a little cut on it or something, or it starts bleeding, what do the other chickens do? They go start pecking at it, and if you don't look out, they'll peck it to death. They're not very kind. People talk about how nice animals are. Well, animals are only nice when they're in the right environment and we treat them good and so on. God said, but it's going to continue until Christ sets up his kingdom. We'll look more about verses at that later. So, what happened after Adam and Eve? Well, time went on after Adam and Eve, and if we look in chapter 6, how do most of the verses in chapter 6 end? 3 words. And he died. What did God say was going to happen? They were going to return to the dust. Chapter 6 says, and he died. And he died. And he died. Over and over and over again. And if we go down to, I'm looking for a verse here and I didn't mark it down. Yeah, okay. Back in Genesis chapter 4, it says about certain people and descendants of Lamech, and it says Ada bare Jabal, and he was the father of such as dwell in tents and such as have cattle, and his brother's name was Jubal. He was the father of all as handle a harp and organ, and Zillah also bare Tubal-Cain, an instructor of every artificer in brass and iron, and the sister of Tubal-Cain was Naamah. And Lamech said unto it, and so on. I find it very interesting, and I don't have any, I've never read in any commentary as an explanation to this, but I find it very interesting that most of the names that are in the Bible are what? They're male, right? But every once in a while, it says somebody's sister was such and such, or somebody's wife was such, and that's all it says. Obviously, it was significant to God, but he didn't tell us why he, it says that Tubal-Cain's sister was Naamah. Like, so what? He doesn't give us any more than that. We don't know anything more about her. But for some reason or other, God put that in there. And how many words of Scripture are inspired? All of them. So there's a reason he put it there. We just don't know what it is. And there's many others down through the genealogies, and it says so-and-so married so-and-so. We don't know who so-and-so was, but he married her. Or somebody had a sister, or somebody had a daughter, and there's no other thing. And I think it's just because, anyway, I don't know what I think. So we had the flood. But before the flood, guess what? There was technology. Before the flood, there was technology. These people weren't a bunch of cavemen going around grunting and couldn't talk and couldn't write and so on. There was technology. I've mentioned this thing here. I have an article. I was going to put a picture in here, but I kind of ran it. I sort of thought of it the last minute, didn't get time. I've got a picture in here of something called Pumapunku. Means the gate of the Puma. Says a mystery that may be greater than the pyramids. I've mentioned this before, but there are some biblical archaeologists that believe that this is a pre-flood city. It's in the Altiplano in Bolivia, way up high at 12,000 feet, very flat plain up there. There's stones up there that weigh 100 tons, and they came from at least 10 kilometers away. They found places where they had the same kind of stone. There's none of it there. How'd they get there? Nobody knows how they moved 100-ton stone. They're bigger than the stones in the pyramids. The other thing is, there's a whole bunch of H shape. You can't see it from here, but H, some of you guys back there have looked this up, haven't you? There's H-shaped stones, and they are so perfect that if you put a level on them, a straight edge on them, you can't slip a piece of paper. They are not carved with a chisel. They are cut with something. Nobody knows how. But some biblical and secular archaeologists say that this is a city that was built between 500 and 600 AD. But there's other secular archaeologists that say that this is, quote unquote, at least 15,000 years old. Well, I suspect both of them are wrong, because 15,000 years ago there wasn't any earth. It could be as much as 10,000 years old. I think it's probably closer to 6, but it's not 15. And they don't know how these were done. And it says right here, a mystery that may be greater than the pyramids. And if you read through this article, and you're allowed, well, you can look it up or whatever, but it's very interesting. They say, we don't know where these came from. We may know where they were dug, but we don't know how they got here, and we certainly don't know how they were cut. There's I don't know if this one has the pictures or not. There's one has a picture of a whole row of holes, and they are exactly so many centimeters apart, exactly, and they are perfectly round. You can't do that with a chisel. There was some technology. That's all I'm saying. That's all I want to say here is there was technology before the flood. They weren't cavemen. They weren't ignorant people. They weren't stupid people. They had a lot of technology before the flood. It was a long time after creation till the flood, about 2,000 years. We only have a couple of, a few chapters in here, and we tend to sort of compress all that time and think that was not very long, but it was a long period of time. There was a lot of people on the earth. And I've read of the numbers that there might have been, but if you have people having 25, 30, 40 children, and they all live to be several hundred years old, you're going to get a lot of people in a couple of thousand years. Well, God looked down in chapter 6, and he said, not very good down there. All the thoughts and imaginations of man's heart is only evil continually. That's never changed. And God destroyed the earth with a flood. And some people think that this plain where this Pumapunku was actually probably at sea level, and during the upheavals during and after the flood, it got pushed up because there's a whole plain there. It's like the prairies. It goes for miles and miles and miles and miles. It's 12,000 feet high, and it's almost perfectly flat. How did that happen? Happened somehow. Didn't happen by erosion. There are stones here that are maybe 20 or 30 feet long, and most of the stone is buried in sediment. How'd that happen? Didn't happen, but there's been nothing cataclysmic since 500 AD that's caused that to happen, not up at that height. It had to happen by some kind of a flood. There's a lake right nearby, 7 kilometers away, called Lake Titicaca. It has two rather interesting, well, many interesting features, but it has two very interesting features. It's slightly salt. There's no salt water, there's no source of salt water near it. And it has seahorses in it. Could it have been part of the ocean at one time? And got pushed up in one giant upheaval, and that whole plain got put there? In the southern part of Bolivia, there are salt flats that have feet and feet and feet and feet of very high lithium content. Does that sound interesting in today's society? They have one of the world's largest deposits of lithium. You know what the problem is? What does it take to refine lithium? Zillions of tons of water. Guess what there isn't up in that plateau? Zillions of tons of water. So that would have to be mined and hauled down out of there and taken somewhere where there's lots of water and so on. And anyway, I think the Bolivian government has sold the rights of it to the Chinese, but and they'll probably figure something out. But rather interesting, isn't it? How to get there? There's no water source at 12,000 feet to have fed into that. So it had to come from somewhere, probably from down below, and got pushed up during the upheaval after the flood. So, what are we saying here? Do you suppose there was a little bit of climate fluctuation during and after the flood? I think so. Geologic strata changed, and that's a whole interesting study that I could yak about for a long time, but I'm not. All air-breathing life died except the people on the ark. The passengers on the ark, not just people, but the passengers on the ark. And temperature and climate change have occurred in cycles ever since. There have been several ice ages and several warming periods. So these have been determined from natural observations, ice cores, tree rings, historical records. When they dig up some of these fossilized trees and so on, and other trees that aren't fossilized but that are buried in glaciers, they can see that, it grew this much, and it grew this much, and it grew this much, and then all of a sudden it only grew this much, and this much, and this much, and this much, and this much. Something was happening in the climate. Something was going on. And then historical records tell us a lot of that. So what are we saying? Climate has always varied. There's no millions of years. At the risk of being redundant, when somebody says 430 billion years ago, or 68 million years ago, or whatever. I was watching an article, a video yesterday that somebody was critiquing a person that doesn't believe in climate change, and that person had a graph. And by the way, folks, if you put out a graph and you publish it, you better make sure it doesn't have any typos on it. Because if you put typos on it, what are you doing? You're leaving yourself open to a lot of criticism. And somebody recently put out a graph dealing with temperatures and so on. The graph was accurate, but they had a typo, a date error on it. It was out by 30 years. I think it was just a typo. They had an 85, and I believe it was an 1885 instead of 1855. But that's important, isn't it? Because if that's wrong, what else is wrong on it? And then they had left out everything since. And it was being all torn apart as being misleading, and it probably was. So be careful what you say. Be careful what you publish. But there's no millions of years. There's no millions of years. Well, let's... Okay, we got 5 minutes. There we go. The history of the earth. There was creation, made perfect. Then there was the fall. The earth was cursed. Then there was the flood. The earth was damaged. Have you ever thought about the mountains? Some of you have been to the Rocky Mountains, or I've been to the Rocky Mountains and the Andes Mountains, and I've flown over the Alps. I'm just saying that, and some of you have done the same thing. What would you say about mountains? They're what? Give me some adjectives that describe them. Huh? They're high. Majestic. Rugged. Cool. Mostly rock. Big. What are they a result of? They're the result of the curse, aren't they? They're the result. The earth wasn't originally built that way. These all came about as a result of the flood. Or some of them as volcano sinks and so on. But the flood changed the earth. But mountains, I find this ironic, that the mountains which are part of the damage that God allowed to, or caused to come on the earth are some of the most majestic things you'll ever see. Some of the most awesome things you'll ever see are the mountains, aren't they? If you've ever driven in the mountains, I mean, you can drive for 10 miles and you want to stop every kilometer or something, or every mile or whatever, and take a picture. It's just amazing. So what about the future of the earth? Environmentalism is built upon an uncertainty about the earth's future. Now, do we know what's going to happen to the earth tomorrow? No, we don't. Do we know what's going to happen in 10 years? No, we don't. Do we know what's going to happen to the earth in general? Huh? Okay. But before that, what's going to happen to the earth? Is it going to get destroyed? Is mankind going to come to an end? Are we going to destroy ourselves? How do we know that? This book says so. God's going to do some things. We're not going to do it. Environmentalism is really a religion. So we had the flood, then we have coming up, maybe very soon, something called the tribulation. And if we read through the prophets and we read through the book of Revelation, what's going to happen there? And I don't want details, but basically, what's going to happen there? Some major destruction, isn't there? There's going to be some major catastrophes that are going to happen. But is the earth going to be destroyed? God's not going to destroy it, but he's going to, our author says it's going to be disturbed. If we go to Revelation chapter 6, and we're running out of time here, if we go to Revelation chapter 6 and 8 and 16, we'll see that there's major things are going to happen to the earth. But it's not going to be destroyed. It's going to be very disturbed. And then the Lord Jesus Christ is going to come back, and he's going to put Satan in prison and so on, and he's going to have a rule of righteousness here on the earth for 1,000 years. And how does the book of Isaiah and other places describe the earth during that 1,000 years? What kind of a place is it going to be? It's going to be a pretty amazing place, isn't it? It's going to be, there's going to be some good problems, but it's going to be restored. So my point here is, and the author's point here is, that the earth is going to be very much disturbed. But within a very short time, the earth by itself and with God's help is going to heal itself. And it's done that before. We've had some great, catastrophes, and the earth heals itself, doesn't it? I mean, we've had hurricanes and so on, and we say, oh, it's just awful. And it is. But what happens a year later? Things look pretty good, don't they? Well, the future of the earth. I'm going to try to finish this in 2 minutes. There's some coming cataclysms. The earth's going to be devastated, not destroyed. We've covered this. During the restoration, the curse is going to be lifted, where it's going to be a wonderful place, and there's going to be a farming problem, it tells us in Amos. You know what that problem's going to be? Anybody know what it says in Amos chapter 9? You might want to look it up, but we won't take time to look it up right now. It says there's going to be a problem. The earth is going to be so productive that before you get the crop gathered, there's going to be another one to harvest. It's going to be a problem. They're going to have a trouble keeping up to it. Brother Henderson was telling me the grass grew so fast at the end of this summer that in some places, by the time they got one cut done, they were ready to do the second cut. or the third cut or fourth cut or whatever it was they did. That's going to be like that all over the world. Man's going to have his pinnacle of his experience on this earth. Not pinnacle of his experience, but his experience on this earth during that restoration. But then the earth is not eternal. It's going to be destroyed because there's going to be a rebellion, and God's going to have an ironic, not iconic, well, iconic too, destruction of the earth. And how is he going to destroy it? What are people worried about today? What's our whole topic about? Climate change and global warming. How's God going to destroy the earth? You're going to burn it up. I suppose that's going to be global warming. That's going to be ultimate global warming. He's going to destroy the earth. And what kind of memories are we going to have of that? Absolutely none. Isaiah 65:17, there's not going to be any memories of it. And there's going to be an amazing new earth, it tells us in Revelation 21. There's going to be a new Jerusalem. There's going to be no sun, no sea. It's going to be the eternal presence of Christ. And for the believers, we have no reason to fear. Man cannot do anything to destroy God's plan for the future. And the question is, have God's plans helped you not to fear? What about, and at that time, not now, but at that time, no one will ever suggest that perhaps man could somehow destroy God's earth, because we're going to know they can't. But what about unbelievers? There's a fearful future event. If a person's not saved, they're going to be sent to the lake of fire. So, what should that do to us? The question is, that warming, there's going to be a permanent warming of the unsaved, and that warming should consume our lives and cause us to warn others. And the question is, do we have someone we should warn? And we should be trusting in God's sustaining power. So, thank you for listening. And I think Julian will be doing the class next week. I'm not sure. We've got to confirm that. But if not, we'll be going on to another topic I'm not sure which one. There's a bunch.